Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Hajj Hassanain Rajabali. I know that this has been a very tiring night for you, and you had 2 speeches before this podcast. And in addition to that, you also talked to like 1,000 people. And I'm just wondering, like, where do you get this energy from? Because I've seen so many people, so many speakers in my life, and as they age, they sort of lose the energy completely. But in your situation, it looks completely opposite. So where do you get this energy from?
I see it as a blessing of Allah. When you meet people and, people want to talk to you, there are 2 things that will be a benefit when you meet people. Either they will share a story with you that will affect you in a positive way, or they will expose something that you've done that's not necessarily good. Those are the 2 main. But of course, people typically want to come and praise you about what you've said. But I'm always interested to know what was it that intrigued them, what made them impressed with what was said. Because that sort of gives me an idea of what to do or what to continue to do or what to stop to do, right? And then how could you get tired when Allah is mentioned? Allah says, وَإِيَّايَ فَارْهَبُونَ. When you get together, talk about me. And it's not, if you want energy that never dies and keeps growing, it's that.
Absolutely. I wanted to actually introduce you formally, but I just felt like if you introduce yourself very briefly, the audience probably don't need your introduction, but a lot of people were sort of wondering, like, your background, not just like your academic background, but more specifically, like how you, like at what age you realized that you had this skill, like public speaking skills, and at what age you started becoming more active, and how that went. If you can just briefly start with that, that'd be awesome.
Well, I was born in Africa, Tanzania, and my parents came here in the early 70s, and we migrated a couple of years after them. And Allah blessed me to be raised in the United States, a great country. I think a country full of opportunities and lots of, growth potentials. And you don't feel the politics of the country as much as you feel it in other countries. Right. So here you have more of that opportunity to grow. And I was blessed to be given the opportunity to learn and to gain my education in the United States. So there are many things that were a blessing besides the fact that we grew up in a nurtured environment, was the fact that we learned the value of our religion, Islam, because when we came, the Muslim population was very small, and there was really no structure for the Muslim community to indulge in. So we had no infrastructure. So my parents were involved in building many of those components of the structures, which helped us understand the value of structures, to understand the value of communities, and to understand the value of the divine principles that drive the community. Mm-hmm. And so it made us understand the beauty of the religion Islam. So I feel that I've become more privileged to have learned the religion of Islam growing up in a non-Muslim country, because we had to define ourselves with more clarity.
Right.
Whereas if we were raised in a Muslim country, there would be many existing structures that we would just be following. Right. And that may not give us the opportunity to participate in the real infrastructure growth.
And so how old were you when you noticed that you had these public speaking skills?
Well, I was quite young. Public speaking, came for me in the university. Mm-hmm. In high school, I was relatively vocal, but nothing of that structure where I would come out and really realize that I'm a public speaker. I wasn't part of any debate teams or anything like that. I wasn't in any Toastmasters programs or anything like that. My first debate I had was when I was 12 years old, in 7th grade, when my teacher in junior high school was bashing Islam and calling it a religion of terror, and basically vilifying and demonizing the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I challenged him in class. I said, I don't know where you're getting these ideas from. So we had a few days of debates on that. So that was really my first time that I actually confronted somebody about my religion. And I want you to understand the scale of time that in the 70s, growing up in the United States, Islam was unheard of. Muslims were very few across the country. And in New York, where we grew up, there were very few families, Muslim families. There was no halal restaurant, halal butcheries. None of that existed at that time. It was just starting to form.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to look back and say that at the age of 12, to defend my religion and to say that Islam is my identity at that age, that was a big blessing for me. I wasn't lost in the woodworks of the social structure. I wasn't, as you say, assimilated in society.
Right.
I was quite living a Western lifestyle, quote unquote, in good ways, but I hadn't lost my identity as a Muslim.
Right.
So that enabled me. But then my real realization about public speaking came when I was in the university, and I needed to take one of these humanities classes, as to fulfill my graduation requirements. So I chose public speaking as a class. It's an evening class that I took at the university, and it was something I needed as a 3-credit.
What was your major?
I majored in psychology and biology undergraduate, then did molecular biology and behavioral genetics. So when I took the class, the public speaking class, I figured, okay, this is just 3 credits. I don't care about its value. Little did I realize that was really one of the most profound classes I took, because there were 3 presentations we had to do. And I felt, okay, I'm going to write some postcards, and I'm going to write some notes on it, and then I'm going to present 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and 7 minutes. So I figured, this is going to be a piece of cake. Just have a card, blab away. So my first presentation was about a subject that I didn't really believe in. It was about the wealth of the elite in the Middle East and so on. And I just chose it because I felt, okay, it's something to talk about.
Something easy to talk about.
Something easy, and the fact that, I have sort of the Muslim culture in me, so I can talk about that.
Sure.
So I went up there, it was a bombshell. That was the longest 3 minutes of my life. It was a disaster.
Interesting.
I was like, and I'm just shifting cards, and I could read nothing, everything blurred, and everybody's looking at me like, you feel like a total fool.
Right.
And then I decided, okay, this is embarrassing. So I said, okay, for the next 2 presentations, I'm just going to wing it. I'm not going to use any cards. I'm going to speak from my heart.
Interesting.
So I said, I'm going to talk about poverty in Africa. And I was very passionate about that. And in the 5 minutes I presented, in the second one, by the 3rd minute, everybody was crying.
Wow. MashaAllah.
The whole classroom was in tears, and it was like pin drop silence. And in 5 minutes, I felt like, wow, I was ruling that class. So it's almost like Allah exposed something to me which I didn't know I was capable of.
Interesting.
So, and the third one was about the political system of the revolution and so on that took place. And it was 7 minutes. And again, I had the crowd, very hooked in 7 minutes. And my professor recorded those presentations. And interestingly, when I left that class the following year, students were telling me that, hey, we listened to your presentation as part of the lesson in that class. I said, wow, that's pretty, interesting.
That's awesome. So Hajj, there's a few topics that I want to talk about. I know we're very limited in time, but one of the topics actually was about career and also, university. So, while we're at this topic, just wanted to ask you, if Hajj Hassanain Rajabali today were to go back in college, what major would you choose today in 2020? And what career path would you take today?
Well, the path that I took, which was, the life sciences, I love life sciences, but I would encourage my, future generations to take law, to take, arts classes, to become leaders in arts, in law, to be able to legislate rules and regulations for society, I think, and to represent the legal front, because I think that's very important. Which we have a lot of doctors and a lot of engineers. We have very few in the other sector, the sector of the marketing world, the public relations world, the entertainment world. We don't have too many representatives there, and we need role models in that part of the world.
So you think liberal arts is not a total waste of time?
No, I think it's extremely important.
Okay.
I believe what I like about the U.S. system is you have to go through undergraduate to be able to enter medical school.
Right.
I think that's very important versus graduating from high school and going straight to medical school. Because I find that doctors who go through the liberal arts undergraduate system tend to be more well-rounded as physicians or as engineers versus those who strictly go into one, pathway of career.
Awesome. Fair enough. We'll come back to career just in a while, but I wanted to know what projects you're involved in these days. From what I know, it seems like the big ones are Camp Taha, as well as the Fulltime school, and also like you have a lot of traveling experiences. So I wanted to kind of talk about each of these projects. But besides these projects, do you have anything else that you're heavily involved with?
Well, these are main projects. To me, one of the most important project of all projects is education.
Okay.
Because I feel that is the means by which we can eradicate mental and spiritual and economic poverty. Our goal should be to eradicate poverty, to create a more middle-class society, because I think that eliminates depression, it eliminates wars. When you have a disparity in economics, it leads to all kinds of unfortunate events in life.
Right. Economic inequality. And whatnot.
So I feel that the camp, for example, was a very important measure for me. 30 years ago, we started doing camps. So, So as soon as I came back from the university, one of the things that I noticed is because I was a skier, I still am, we took kids on a ski trip. That was the first trip I ever did with kids. And I noticed these kids who came from various backgrounds, they changed. They became very focused towards Allah. They became very good human beings. So I felt like, wow, this just through a ski trip, because the skiing was the attractor, but the actual transaction during the ski trip was really the lesson. And I found these kids gravitated very quickly towards the truth, and they submitted themselves towards the divine ways without resistance.
Right.
So it was an indicator to me that this is the way you should encourage the next generation to grow them through these programs. So the camp became sort of incubated through the ski trip first. Then in the summer, we took kids to Lake George in New York. And we took about 100. First year was 50 kids. The second year was about 100. Then it grew to a couple of hundred. And I think the largest we had was 500 kids.
MashaAllah.
So
what were the age ranges for these?
It's all ages. Because our policy is it's a holistic, life-changing proposition.
Right.
So if parents can join, then we can also affect the parents. And I think that's a faster way to raise a community.
So you don't enforce any age restrictions, even today?
Even today.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's interesting because we want to cater to all age groups, including parents. Because if we can educate the parents and give them a good experience, and the kids are involved in it, then there's a better investment towards it, right? It's faster.
Yeah.
You train a child, they go home, and then the parents are going in the wrong direction.
Right.
Then it's a constant battle.
A lot of people, there's a lot of youth leaders that want to help out in youth camps. So if we can, talk more about it for a few minutes, I think that would be very helpful for people that are organizing.
Yeah. So the purpose of the camp is to empower the next generation to feel confident about who they are. Camps typically do that. There's about 12,000 camps in the United States. Yeah. We have about 12,000 plus camps in the United States. Most of them are Christian, non-denominational Jewish camps, right? But they're all very effective. They're very powerful in whatever persuasion they are at, because kids going away in a retreat form tend to be affected very positively. Even people, ex-CEOs of Walt Disney, for example, would attribute their successes due to the 10 days of camp that they went to. So an Islamic camp is very important for our kids, not only to focus and reflect on the divine, but to network and to meet kids of like-minded, backgrounds,
Right.
And to sort of build relationships. So it's a networking environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very important. Now, once you do that, and these children start to learn what the value of life is, then they start to become more responsible. And then the next thing they want to give back. So you'll find most camps in the United States, what they do is they produce future counselors through their camps. So campers become counselors usually.
How do you decide what topics you should have? Like, is it a good idea to create a theme for each camp?
Sure.
And how does the process look like?
Always have a theme, but always leave it fluid. In other words, don't limit the scope of questions, because whatever question you get has some importance. So if you can address every issue of a child or an adult in a cohesive way, then I think it's what the mission is for. I mean, what's the use of a camp? Well, camp is you've given up your distractions, you're focused, you're there for a certain number of days, so you have a lot of time, you can hang out, you don't have any other commitments. So what are you going to spend that time? You're going to enjoy, you're going to socialize, you're going to do sports, and you're going to build the mind and the spirit.
Right. So how do you pick a theme?
Well, you'd have to look, there are many themes. Quran has so many themes, right? But anything that's proactive, that's progressive, that's motivational would be the right kind of theme.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
so I would say, look, what is the problem today? Kids have a very low sense of self-worthiness, for example, right? Depression is on the rise. Suicidal talk is on the rise. Okay, how do you counter that? So you'll create themes that motivate you, give you hope, that shows you how to become more tranquil, to become more satisfied, so you don't experience as much depression.
And is there like a committee that decides on what topics?
We have a team,
Okay.
and we sort of share ideas. And because we are so much on the front lines dealing with these kinds of things, we tend to know exactly where to go.
I see.
Yeah, because we are dealing with day-to-day problems with the next generation, so we
Sure.
we know what sort of topics we should be covering during that time.
And how do you actually invite speakers to speak? Because I know that sometimes you invite youths that aren't even quote-unquote qualified to come and speak. So how does that process look like?
Well, qualification is a subjective matter. One group may see that person is not qualified, but then who's to dictate?
Right.
Maybe we're not looking for such quality. Maybe we're looking for some other quality, which that person is qualified. We don't want to use cookie-cutter qualification systems where you have to fit the mold to be considered qualified. I think that's almost like following a system that wants to dictate. I like us to sort of give the potential to that youth to become qualified if they're not, and who's to dictate what's qualification?
Sure.
Generally, a person should have a relative ability to do things. I mean, I can say, look, you're interviewing me right now.
Right.
Are you really a professional interviewer?
Absolutely not.
Okay, but you're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Can I say you're not qualified? I say, well, it depends. I mean, if you make a mockery of what you're doing, then maybe I say you're not qualified.
Right.
But look, I can assure you, if you continue to do what you're doing now, a year from now, 2 years from now, maybe you'll be running a big a radio station,
And I can quit my full-time job.
Yeah,
Inshallah.
and well, either quit or you just add on to your full-time
Not
job.
that I want to. But
Yeah, but you would just add on to your full-time
right.
job.
And a lot of people actually attend these camps because they want to look for their future spouse. And do you have any objectives, objections?
Well, that's
for
one
that?
of the reasons people come. I mean, a lot of the youth who come don't come for future spouses. But I think it's a great idea, because if those younger groups, if they keep coming each year and they get to know the campers who are like 80% return campers, then they build their personalities around that character, right? Around that camp. And so when they're ready to get married, their selection is much more focused, because now they know the history of these people. And we certainly would encourage that.
I see. So it's okay if the youths kind of mingle with each other, because I know some communities, they're very restrictive, especially because the parents are there, and some communities are like in the other extremes. So I want to know like how to draw the right line.
Well, restricting is important.
Yeah.
You don't want to violate the moral principles of modesty, but restricting to a level of what? Putting them behind, bubbles And then when they're ready to get married, they have no idea what the other side is like. Then they go marry outside, and they meet people at work or at clubs or at pubs or at bars, or at the mall. I don't think we want to encourage that.
Yeah,
I think the net result is we should encourage our kids to find their future spouses within our environments. And we certainly allow such kind of, transaction within modesty. Look, the interesting thing is, if you put kids in a bubble, kids are very savvy. They will know what's on the other side.
Right.
Okay, let's not fool ourselves. So to think that, we're all just so pure and modest and, just very holy, it's not the reality.
Right.
At the end of the day, let's face the fact that our kids are always going to be having these kinds of thoughts and discussions. And I don't think we should nip it in the bud and kill it. I think we should nurture it, so that when they are ready to get married, they make the right choices. But to demonize the desire for the other gender, I don't think that's what Islam is promoting. I think Islam promotes managing the desires, not killing the desires.
Right. Yeah, I really like that point. So there's so much more to talk about just within this topic of camp, but I want to kind of shift gears and talk about full-time school. It's Wise Academy, right? That you're running right now.
Correct.
So recently, our community also has we've been running Rise Academy as well. So, and I know that there's many other communities in the U.S. and outside of U.S. that are also interested in being involved and potentially starting full-time academies as well. So there's a few, areas that we can talk about. But why don't we just go ahead and get started with the reason why we need an Islamic school? Because there's a lot of parents that feel that they don't need to send their kids to Islamic schools and that sending them to a really good Catholic school would be enough. I know for a fact that within our community, there are people that even send their kids to Catholic schools and they feel like that's more than enough for them.
Or a private school or a public school.
Sure, yeah, or public school, exactly. So why do we even need an Islamic school?
Okay, that's a great question. If you ever examine the growth of a human being from childhood, what is the most important aspect of a child that becomes an adult? It's to give them good moral instructions, because at the end of the day, that's what matters the most. It's not your abilities in terms of what you can do with science or with speaking or with arts. It's the moral fabric of the individual. Are they honest? Are they caring? Are they sharing? Are they giving? Are they forgiving? Are they loving? These are the kinds of qualities we must raise our children, and to be, of course, God conscious. The problem we have with public schools is that in the last many decades, legislation has been passed where religion cannot be taught in school. It's a taboo to speak about God. And I see where they're coming from, but I also see a problem with that. So because in public schools, you can talk about the academics of a child, but you cannot talk about their moral conduct, then these children that are growing up in public schools have to be self-regulated or regulated by their parents or by some ancillary organization, right? Which becomes a very difficult task, because raising children in that kind of an environment is like one step forward, two steps backwards, one step forward, two steps backwards. It just doesn't work. So public schools, the beauty of them is that they are very well funded in general. They have fantastic programs and structures, because tax money that is being used tends to give a lot better services. So if a parent is looking for those kinds of services, then they'll typically be attracted to public schools. And in this part of the region, like in the Bay Area, public schools tend to be very good, right? So you're always having that competition that, why would I send my child to a parochial school when I can have it for free, number one? Number two, my child can get all the bells and whistles. But what they're forgetting is that they're not getting the moral construction. And if you ask any parent, what's the bottom line construction that you must give to your child? It's the moral construction. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm a product of public schools. Okay, I grew up in public schools. But when I went to public schools, our levels of modesty and so on was much higher than today. In today's world, it's getting worse, right, in terms of lack of modesty. So it's a dangerous environment, but if parents can really train their kids to be independent and swim in that so-called environment, then more power to them. But that doesn't preclude the fact that we as a society should create institutions and structures that protect the future of our children at the moral level,
Right.
which is where the Islamic school becomes extremely essential.
Okay, so fair enough, but what does it mean to have an Islamic school? Are we just like teaching the Quran in addition to science?
No, this
What is
idea
it?
of secularism, you know, the whole idea of separation of religion from state, or, you know, the secular sciences from religion, this notion that you go into an Islamic class and you're going to learn the Quran is a misstatement. It's a misconception of the truth, you know. The reality is that divine consciousness is holistic and it's ubiquitous and it's what we call ethereal. It's everywhere. So when you send a child to a good Islamic school, you don't preach religion to them. You just feel it all around you. So even a non-Muslim should enjoy that environment. It should not be where it's very conducive to Muslims, but a non-Muslim will not enjoy it. I think it should be conducive to all human beings. So you're not proselytizing, you're not taking a child and converting them, or you're not indoctrinating a child to become this, you know, ideologue or this zealot,
Right.
you know, of a Muslim. I don't think that's a good Islamic school.
I see.
A good Islamic school nurtures the child in a safe environment that's modest, that's honest, and it has good moral prescription, but that's amicable to all kinds of people. Those are the common laws of the Quran, for example. If you look at Catholic schools in general, they do follow those protocols too. You know, so that's why Catholic schools tend to be also relatively safe environments because of that fact. But, you know, there's a big difference in what we teach in Islam versus Catholicism. You
Right,
see?
right.
So it's our responsibility as Muslims to impart the Islamic education for our children. So having said that, putting a child in an Islamic school means that they have to be top-notch academically. They have to compete with the finest students around the country, if not the world. So academically, there is no room for negotiation. Okay? So one cannot say, I'm going to an Islamic school, therefore my academics are not important. I'm going to be a hafiz of Quran. I'm going to memorize the Quran. That's really my goal. No. What we're going to do is we're going to teach them to become very smart in all the secular quote-unquote sciences, although I don't believe in secular anything, because I think everything is towards God anyway. But having said that, if we take our children and we raise them where they are God-conscious and they are aware of the Quran and they know the basic laws of Islam, that's not possible unless you give them an Islamic environment, hence an Islamic school.
What, in an ideal, perfect world, how would an Islamic school look like?
In an ideal, perfect world, an Islamic school looks like the one that resonates the theme and the rhythm of the Quran. I believe the Holy Quran is a book that's modest, that's very balanced, that's very inclusive, not exclusive, that's non-judgmental. And if you ask me about the Holy Prophet ﷺ and his Ahlul Bayt, I see them as those kinds of beings, where any human being from any school of thought or any religion would feel very comfortable being trained by those kinds of people. You know?
Hajj, there's like a very valid concern that a lot of parents have when it comes to Islamic schools. They want to make sure that their kids are assimilated in society. They don't want their kids to have accents, or they don't want the kids to have teachers that have accents. And they want to be able for their kids to interact with John and Lisa or whoever in a way that they can relate to. And one of the concerns that these parents have, which I think is a valid concern, is how are we going to ensure that these kids assimilate in this society?
Well, I think, to use the term assimilation, first of all, you have to be very careful with assimilation. When a child is raised in America, or in any country for that matter, the natural forces of the social system in that region will affect the child whether they like it or not. And America has a very powerful culture that it's exporting constantly, from Hollywood, from the music industry, from the fashion industry. And this is not new. Even third world countries are affected by this export of the revolution of of the culture.
Right.
So to say a child growing up in America is going to live in a cocoon and have an accent, I haven't seen one yet in all my years of living in America. Okay, number one. I mean, usually it's the parents who don't indulge with anything,
Right.
and they could be here for 40 years and they still don't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
But the students, kids who go to school here, no, they will naturally evolve and they will have the accent that's even in an Islamic school.
Right.
And we don't have an Islamic school of foreigners who don't know any English. I mean, this notion of a very cocoonized Islamic school just
Right.
doesn't exist.
Right.
Okay, we're not in a desert someplace, we're training, children of ISIS or Al-Qaeda someplace. We don't have
Right,
that.
right.
So when children come to an Islamic school, they have the lingo. They have the same. The difference is dating becomes harder for them.
Mm-hmm.
Smoking becomes harder. Vaping becomes harder.
Right.
Drug abuse, right? Or vulgarities, using foul language. Immodesty, where a girl is now expressing her love for a boy in public. In public school, it's allowed.
Mm-hmm.
In an Islamic school, you won't be allowed. But ask any parent, which one would you prefer? Even the Western child who is, not Muslim, for example, if you ask those parents, they'll tell you, I want my daughter to grow up in a modest environment. I don't want boys chasing my daughter all the time.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
Islamic schools do that. And then these children do participate in all kinds of extracurricular activities in society,
Right.
between neighbors and friends and so on. And television is there. And today you've got social media. Kids are continuously connected to that part of the world. So there's no way you can sort of, what we say, immunize them from that, or where you quarantine them in a way that they cannot assimilate. I think
Right.
the natural forces of social, society
Right.
will bring our children to be
Yeah.
like typical Western kids.
Right. And then just one more question in the subject of education before we move on. Some parents, the very religious parents, also have this concern that what if there are kids that are coming from a non-Islamic school background? How do we properly ensure that their transition into the Islamic schools is beneficial to everyone?
Well, gradually. For example, kids in non-Islamic environments don't even say Assalamu alaikum. They say hi.
Right.
And how are you? What's up?
Mm-hmm.
When they come to an Islamic school, they'll say Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so is that too much to ask for? No. Kids learn to do that very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
If you went to a Hebrew school, you say Shalom. That's okay. That's what you learn, right? I mean, when I went to Catholic school, we learned the catechism.
Mm.
We learned to pray in the way they pray, Our Father which art in heaven. So is it wrong? No, it's good to know that. I think that's wonderful.
Right.
You have access to what other religions practice. You get a little taste of that. I think that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So when a child who comes from a non-Muslim environment will learn the basics of Islamic lifestyle, and it's not so different from the rest of societies. It's not like we live in a completely different universe,
Right.
A lot of things we do are very similar.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That
So,
makes sense.
okay, so we have prayers. So a child may not have prayed, they don't know how to pray. So you gradually teach them how to pray
Right.
till they get used to it. I think that's great.
What if they have some terrible background, like if they're just constantly swearing and all of a sudden they want to come to Islamic school?
Right.
That's a valid concern, right?
It is a concern, but human beings, even those who have a vulgar tongue,
Mm-hmm.
tend to control it if the environment doesn't promote vulgarity. So you'll find a person who uses foul language. If they're in a circle of people who don't use it, they can't use it. It doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get the reaction. So that's a very subtle way of stopping them from using it. So I think that's great. But if they do use it, we warn them that don't use it.
Right.
Now, the problem with the other societies that allow vulgarities is no one tells them not to do it. It's the norm. In fact, they argue that if you don't use it, you'll get bullied.
Mm-hmm.
So why not stop the bullying so you don't have to use it? Why not create a more conducive environment so there's no need to use vulgar language? Vulgar language is filthy. It brings negative vibes. It belittles. It makes the person using it look low. We have to show that. We have to show that effect. People who use foul language, they look low class, they look low level. Everybody will tell you that. I mention this in my lectures. Some of my clients use it all the time, but when I'm in their presence, they don't use it. And they will avoid it without even me being told about it. And then later on, I come to find out that they don't use it because I'm next to them. Although I am, they're my clients, so they pay me, to give them service. Yet they don't use it out of respect because they know I don't like it. I don't use it. So why would they do that? Why don't they use vulgar languages in front of me? Because they know, their fitra knows, their inner conscience knows that when they do use it in front of a person who doesn't use it, they will look low class.
Right.
But if everybody's using the foul language, then we're all low class together. So let's all go down to the cesspool, dungeon, and let's all just curse at each other. I mean, is that the way of living, or should we rise to the occasion of becoming upright human beings?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And finally, the last topic that I wanted to cover is your travel experiences. We all know that you travel a lot, and you've been pretty much everywhere in the world. But I wanted to know from a more macro level. I wanted to know what directions, based on your experiences, travel experience, what directions do you think, in general, Muslims are heading toward right now, and what concerns you?
Well, traveling, first of all, is very recommended. Quran even recommends traveling. Siru fil ard, Allah says, go travel the earth. Because traveling will expand your horizon. It'll make you more, broad-minded, and you will respect humanity better. Because you're basically breaking a myopic lifestyle. So I encourage anybody who can afford to travel. And these days, traveling is not expensive. I would highly encourage people to travel. Get out of your town, go somewhere, see the other side of the world. Sometimes moving from one state to another could be a culture shock for people.
Right.
Do that. But my observation around the world has been apathy, a lot of depression. People are very much addicted to smartphones. They're trying to connect with the superhighway of social worlds, and they're very depressed, because they're thinking the quantity of likes will make them happy. So if you have 1 million likes, you're not as happy as if you had 1,000,001. And that quantification system to try to bring tranquility to the heart is a big lie.
Is this something you observe only in Western countries, or?
No, it's global. Even in Africa, in Asia, everywhere.
Wow.
Everywhere.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I advise that. The other observation I've had is there's minimal talk, sensible talk, on how to get tranquility and to come to the principles of justice and truth. A lot of our youth don't know that. They know it exists, they do experience it a little, but there's no conversation around it. There's minimal conversation. So
it's a very shallow level, you mean?
Shallow level, and people are therefore very impulsive.
Right.
And when you have a persistent, impulsive environment, you tend to become compulsive.
Yeah, one of the things that concerns me is that a lot of the younger population, Muslims, they're turning toward some of these figures that are becoming popular, like Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
And that really concerns me, because while they might have some valid points, I feel like a lot of Muslims aren't equipped with the proper tools to make the right judgment.
No, I think the fact that they're getting attracted to people like Jordan Peterson is a good thing, because people like Jordan Peterson talk sense. Although it's from their perspective, from his perspective, but there's sense in it. So our population is telling us, the speakers and the public environment that does provide knowledge, that, hey, talk this lingo, we like this lingo. Don't preach religion down our throats. Let's have good, cohesive academic talk.
Right.
So people like Jordan Peterson is a good example of the fact that there's a population out there that loves to have this conversation. I think that's great. Think about it. At least they're not ignorant.
Right.
They want to have sound conversations. So I don't think you should have fear of that. Now, let them learn from variety of opinions. Let a discussion take place, let dialogues take place. But let the scholars within the Muslim world also articulate clarity in this collection of conversations,
Right.
and let the people decide who has the best, most cohesive argument towards the divine, and what is the real way of living.
So it looks like this is a very clear sign to anyone that wants to get into this field of sort of being public speakers to the Muslim community, that maybe they can kind of learn to connect with the Muslims through some of these techniques that...
Well, Quran has already addressed it.
Right.
The Sunnah of the Prophet, the Sunnah of Ahlul Bayt has already been established. And these methods have already existed for a long time. We've ignored them. We haven't used them properly. And then you have these Simon Sinek's coming up and Joe Dispenza's, and you're talking about, these big pundits of speakers, right? Who are coming and presenting all kinds of interesting ways of living. And my hat's off to them. At least they're doing something.
Sure.
They're trying to affect lives in positive ways. But I do believe the true solution lies for those who understand the true message of the Quran. And if they can deliver it in a more concise, perspicuous way, I think it'll be much more powerful than all the Dispensers and the Sinek's and the, all these Peterson combination of talk. This will outdo all of them.
Do you have any books that you recommend to the Muslim population? Any Islamic English books?
There are lots of different books. It depends on what the interest is. Some people have philosophical interests. Others have more fictional interests. Others have interest in history.
Sure.
So it all depends. But there are experts in various areas. And even the non-Muslim writers, there are some fantastic writers that what they're saying resonates a lot with what the Quran says.
Any particular authors that you'd like to recommend?
Well, I like I mentioned today in my lecture, I like Malcolm Gladwell, for example. I think he's a prolific writer. I think he expresses, very eloquently in many ways. But there are so many other, presenters out there that are very good. I love Shahid Mutahari. I think he was a brilliant scholar, in terms of philosophy. Shahid Bakr Sadr, these were fantastic presenters,
Right.
Sayyid Mujtaba Lari, his presentations on usul, aqaid, and so on. But if that's where your interest is, you want to get into historical books, Sayyid Asghar Rizvi's book, Restatement of Islamic History. There are so many, but it all depends on what do you want to learn.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess like finally, this is kind of random. I noticed that you're very passionate about business in general, and you're always promoting Muslims to sort of get into this field of like, business. Why is it that Hajj is so enthusiastic about Muslims being involved in business? And why do you think, should we even care about wealth building, wealth creation? Why is that even important?
Well, I don't know how you finance any kind of project. I mean, when the Prophet, promoted Islam in the early days of Mecca, it was Khadija who was the businesswoman who financed the whole project. I mean, if not for her wealth, I don't know what sort of difficulty the Prophet would have gone through. So I think wealth management is part of the Islamic protocol. Quran mentions it. Making money for Allah and spending it. وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. What we have given them, they spend. So why should we not get it? I think it's our right. And the Muslim population is one of the wealthiest populations in the world. Some of the richest people on earth are Muslims, particularly followers of Ahlul Bayt.
Right.
But it's a gross misplacement of wealth. Hence, it's not as effective. But we need a lot of structure. And we need to sustain ourselves to be able to live in a competitive world and to also be able to spend as and when needed. I mean, I just visited an Elks Lodge in Orlando, Florida. So you're talking about a 5-star camp. It was a fantastic camp facility, which we rented, in Orlando. We just had a 3-day camp there.
MashaAllah.
So besides our own camp, which we own in Michigan, we also leased one in Orlando. And when you walk around the facility, you're looking at these fantastic structures, It didn't come for free. These people are well invested. It's a non-denominational camp facility, but it's well invested. Look at the YMCA. It's one of the largest structures in the United States, globally actually. How do you think they get their money? You look at United Way. These are non-profit entities, right? They're one of the richest. Cancer Society, the American Cancer, It's extremely wealthy. It's worth billions of dollars. Why should those philanthropies get so rich and have such fantastic structures that they can do all kinds of things? Why shouldn't we? When did God say that when you want to do my work, deal with it in poverty and walk with tattered clothes and barely scrape your food in order to do my work? When did God say that?
Right.
Allah says, قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادِهِ وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ. Who made haram for you the beauty of God's beauty of this world? When did they say? So I think business, I think going into careers, being professional, being executive, taking high positions in Fortune 500 companies is a fiduciary right of every Muslim.
So you think every Muslim that's working in the industry should strive to make it big?
Absolutely.
What about people that say...
Who would ever suggest it any other way?
Yeah.
Whatever you do, make it small.
Right, but what about people that say, well, I don't want to get sucked into this, right?
Well, of course, don't get sucked into it. Look, Suleiman was the richest man on earth. If you take all the Bilderbergs and you take the Warren Buffetts and take the Jeff Bezos, combine them all together, they were not as rich as Suleiman. Suleiman had surveillance, living beings as birds talking to him as to what's happening around parts of the world. Who has that today? His palace was made, the floor was made of glass. You're talking thousands of years ago. Who had that? Who has that today? But was he sucked in? No. He was a servant of God. He brought a queen to Islam because of his wealth. So why not use that power of wealth to bring justice and equity on earth?
So are you telling me, with all seriousness, that someone can be a CEO of a billion-dollar company, like in Silicon Valley, billions and like Mark Zuckerberg, and he can have the same amount of level of taqwa as some ayatollah?
Why not? Who said you cannot? Sure, money can be a distraction, but lack of money is a distraction too. And if you're going to move societies, how are you going to do it if you don't have wealth? Let me ask you, how did Suleiman bring a queen to Islam if he was a poor man in the middle of a desert? It's not easy. You can, like Musa alayhi salam, he did, but Pharaoh didn't accept it. But the point is, Allah is showing, look, use your wealth to bring others who are in wealth towards Allah. What's wrong with that? So you can be a very modest person with good morals while you're controlling $1 trillion company. You could be the CEO of Apple. You could be the CEO of Amazon and still be a moral person. No one said that the condition of massive wealth is you have to be immoral. Sure, a lot of it is immoral, but that doesn't make it exclusive.
You've seen so much in your life so far. You've seen a lot of downsides and upsides. Why do you remain so optimistic today?
Because God is merciful. He didn't create us for sport and play on this earth. And His mercy overrides all these fears that we have. God has not put us in a state of peril. We have put ourselves in a state of peril. And I have tremendous hope that no matter how we humans abuse each other, there's always a silver lining to correction. And I'm hopeful for that. For if I lose that hope, then I will fall into the eternal abyss of lack of hope and depression. There are only two ways to live on this earth. Either you're for it, or you lose it. Why would you want to let go?
Hajj, I want to conclude this, but before we end this podcast, one quick question. If you were to buy a billboard and you could write any word on it, 2 words, you can put this billboard anywhere in the world, maybe in Times Square, what would those 2 words be?
be good.
Be good. Alhamdulillah.
كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. For the word good in its capital G is God.
Ahsant. That was very deep. Well, I want to thank you so much. I know that you were very tired today, and thank you so much for coming over and doing this podcast, and thank you for being very involved in the community and the awesome and amazing speeches that you've given. And may Allah bless you, and
keep
thank
up
you
the
very
good
much.
work, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah.
May Allah give you success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.